You're listening to the Master Wildlife Filmmaking Podcast, episode 32. In 2013, Miraca Walker joined the BBC's Natural History Unit as an apprentice and has since worked on many series, including the BAFTA and Emmy award-winning series Planet Earth 2. Her background is in natural history filmmaking, including production management and development, where she has been in the field working in a variety of environments from hot, humid climates and swamps to temperate forests, and has filmed species such as macaques, moose, beavers, chipmunks, and red crabs. She is now the researcher for Open Plains and Human episodes of the global landmark series Planet Earth 3. Hi Miraca, thanks for taking the time out to be on the Master Wildlife Filmmaking Podcast. How are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Feeling excited to have a little chat, so I always enjoy that. So,
fantastic. Well, we're having a heat wave here in Nevada. It's been like 100 degrees every day. What's it doing there in Bristol?
It has been really hot and really lovely and classic. It's gone grey and raining
right.
and windy.
Well, we're only just
Classic
coming into
British
summer. Right. Well, it's just the beginning.
Yeah.
So it could all change, but
yeah. I mean, it's a nice respite because it's, we're not used to the heat here, so no one has like proper air conditioning or anything like that, so you suffer.
Right.
But,
well, I do have air conditioning, but when I record these, I have to turn it off because it's just too noisy. So if you see me starting to sweat, you'll know why.
Good heads up.
So Miraca, this is all about showing aspiring wildlife filmmakers how people in the industry broke into the industry, their kind of journey as they made it up into to their career that they're in. And working for the BBC, we would love to know kind of what your journey was, how it started. Did you dream of this when you were a child and then just sought that path, or was it different to that?
It was a bit different to that. I think for me, it came a little bit later in life. I've always had, an affection and a passion for wildlife. So I grew up in Australia. I was born out there, and my parents were always kind of taking us out for walks, or always, going everywhere. They're both British as well, so they had this attitude that we'll go for picnics and we'll go for walks and things like that. And in Australia, it's always quite an adventure doing that because you'll come across all sorts of creatures. And so I've always had like a natural just love for it. I think I first wanted to be a marine biologist, and then when I was like 8, and then I got distracted by drama and wanting to be an actress or actor, and then realizing I wasn't very good at it. And then when I was 18, my parents took me and my brother back to the UK. So this is where we are now. So that was over 10 years ago now, showing my age. And it was from moving from there, I'd always had sort of a passion, again, sort of for media as well, and like becoming, behind the camera and things like that. And that's where I really found my passion was actually, I'd much rather be behind the camera. And so I just, where did I start next? Okay, yeah. So,
how did my life go?
I'm trying to remember. So I started getting involved in community projects here in Bath and Bristol, and so just kind of like making my own short films once I moved back to the UK. And then from there, what happened is I applied for a scheme that the BBC were doing. It was called Face to Face, and it was reaching out to people within the community who had showed an interest in media. And you got to come along once a week to the BBC and have like masterclasses, and kind of get your foot in the door that way. And then at the end, they were offering like 3 months placements. I didn't get the placement, but it wasn't long after that they were first starting their rounds of doing a new apprenticeship scheme. So I was one of the first rounds to do that, and so this was like back in 2013. So I hadn't had any official training. I hadn't gone to university. I just showed my commitment. So I was, at the time, I was working as a waitress full time because I had to pay rent, pay my way. And in between that, I did all my little short films and just showed that I had a passion and knack for it. And then, so one thing kind of like led onto another, not without lots of no's. So right. I think if one thing I've learned throughout my journey is, if you look at all my applications, I've got lots of no's, but a few yeses. And I think that's all that really it takes, is just a lot of determination and a lot of kind of just going, okay, I didn't get that, but what else is there? And I think what also helped was, getting my foot in the door and talking to people and getting my name out. And then, so let's slightly backtrack, I guess.
Well, I just want to let me just pull it, and I'll let you carry on just a second, Miraca. I just want to pull a couple of things out there, because
I'm like slightly getting lost. I'm like, no, but that's my journey going.
There's a couple of things you said there which I think are so unbelievably important. One, that you were making your own films and you continued to do that, which I think to any of us who are in the industry now and we're looking to take apprentices on, or looking for people who are coming into the industry, it's so important that we see that people are actively doing something like going out and filming. If you want to be a camera person, you should have a camera and you should be out there filming, regardless of whether anyone's paying you to do so. And I think that's so valid, because I think, I've met people who are, I would love to do what you're doing. I want to be a wildlife filmmaker, but they don't have a camera. They've not filmed anything, and they're not being proactive. And so I think that is huge.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, you don't have to be, especially like, say, if you want to be a camera person, you don't have to really go anywhere to show off your skills. I remember I was talking to one of my producers, and he was saying, I'd much rather someone film some pigeons and show me that they can keep the focus and that they can, track with them and make them look really beautiful. And then, rather than someone, going off far-flung places and not being able to show, have the focus and things like that. So it's really about just using what's around you and using that to the best of ability. I mean, if you don't have a camera, because obviously cameras are quite expensive, if you can have the opportunity to try and borrow someone, or even like using, phones are fairly good now. But, it's really about showing your creativity, as well as, determination and things like that, and just kind of being resourceful in whatever, is around you, because it is hard. I think, getting those first steps in the door and first foot in the door and things like that. But I think it's exactly what you're saying.
But I also really like the fact that you said that you went along and you did those workshops, and you didn't get into the mentoring or the their initial kind of giving people what did you call them?
It was a placement. So it was a paid placement, and right. There was only a few spots to go, and I didn't get it, and so I just kept
here
going.
You are. And yet you exactly. You kept going, and the door opened for you just further down. It's so valid to remember that when we're looking to try and break into an industry like this, which is a very small industry, that it doesn't, just because one door closed in front of you doesn't mean that was your chance and it's over. The fact that you kept going, and just a few months later another door opened and you were able to be taken on as an apprentice is fantastic, and it shows perseverance is what it's all about.
Well, just to give you a bit of sort of scale as well, from me moving back to the UK at 18, I didn't start at the BBC until I was 21. So, and I think especially for natural history filmmaking, I've been at the BBC now for 8 years. Not all the time being a researcher. I was in production management, but we can talk about that in a minute. But I was just saying, like, it takes time, and I think that's a big thing. I think we're in a kind of world now where everybody expects things to be instant, and we need to have like, in a year we're going to be so somewhere like really high up, but it doesn't really work like that in natural history. It takes a lot of time, because you have to really be, especially in production, in my type of role, researching and and then moving up into like assistant producer and producer roles, you have to be so many different types of things. So it's not just you're not just a storyteller, you're also a bit of a scientist. You've also, health and safety is such a paramount part of what we do. So you have to learn all of that. You have to become, first aid trained. And so you have to accumulate all these skills. And you do that through working, and you do that through experience. I mean, I didn't have that at all before I started at the BBC. They were great because they did a lot of training and things like that, but getting your foot in the door, it's a process, because you just have to be so many different things. And that's one thing I love about my job, is that you get to do so many different types of things. Every day is different, and you get to wear so many different types of hats, but it takes time.
Well, and that is what, I mean, that's what I love about the industry as well. It doesn't matter whether you're a camera person or a producer or a PA or whatever you're doing, you end up doing so much more as part of a crew. And we've spoken about this before, and you touched upon it, that when you were taken on, they didn't really care that you didn't have any experience per se, or directly with what you were doing, because they were able to show you what they wanted. And as long as you're proactive and can be part of a team to get the productions done, I think that's the most important thing. And we've had no end of guests say the same thing. It's always
Absolutely.
about people who are willing to do anything to get the production done.
Yeah, it's teamwork. Again, that's something that I love about the job, is that you really get to work with amazing people, and you really get to kind of pull together, and it's such a huge team effort. But talking about not having this, the experience, not going to university or studying, things like that, simple things like having the experience of, calling people up on the phone and having a certain phone manner. I got that through work, as a waitress, and I also worked in a toy shop as well, briefly in between. And so I got these kind of these different kind of skill sets that sometimes if you come straight from school and you don't always have that. It's quite nerve. I used to find it really scary, calling people up and having conversations on the phones. I used to sort of prep myself. I'd be like, right, what am I going to say?
Right.
But it was little things like that kept things you take with you, and you can show that when you go for these kind of talking to people and things like that. And a lot of the time, it's down to who you are as a person as well. I think you have to be resilient. I think it's a big one.
Right.
And just a massive team player, and just have a fun. You want to have fun and be there, and also, like I said, being proactive is a huge one. And I think just being determined is another big one, because you keep that with you throughout the whole. You keep those kind of skills with you, and that kind of attitude. I think attitude's a really important thing as well.
And then I would imagine being flexible with your hours. I know this because right now it's, what is it here? It's 9:20 in the morning. It's 5:20 in the evening for you. And I know that, dealing with people in the UK, because I'm obviously from the UK originally, from Cambridge, but now in Nevada, but dealing with, say, people at the BBC, a lot of the time I'm speaking to them in my early afternoon, which means it's their 9 or 10 or even 11 o'clock at night. So do you find that working on these kind of global series that you're up at all hours doing that kind of thing?
I mean, yeah, that definitely happens. You tend to shift your working patterns, accordingly, but also at the same time, it's not, you also get those hours back. So if you're doing those kinds of late hours and things like that, those working late, you then just sort of, flip your time around. So if you're working till 11 o'clock at night, the next day, you don't have to start till midday and things like that. It's super flexible. And I think even more so now in this sort of COVID world, we've found that, working from home can be really great, but also really tough, because you're not bouncing off each other's ideas and things like that, and having these little organic conversations. That's been really tough for everybody, but at the same time, it's allowed people to be incredibly flexible with their working hours. People have families and young children and things like that. I have cats. I mean, they they need my attention.
Yeah.
But it's incredible. Yeah, I think that's something that's great about about the role, is that you do get to talk to people all over the world, all at crazy hours, sometimes super early in the morning, sometimes super hour at night, but you make that work, and you don't have to kind of, we're aware, we know when it's or when you've really got to push, like in the build up to shoots, when just before you're leaving, like that's what some of the busiest times, and you do pull long hours, for sure. But then when it's a little bit quieter, we kind of take it a little bit easier and things like that. So it swings.
Yeah.
It's not this sort of set time. It swings.
Now, so here you are. You're researching and production manager. I'm not sure. Are you researcher and production manager on Planet Earth 3, or researcher? What's your title with that?
So I'm a researcher on Planet Earth 3. Yeah. And that kind of entails, what does it entail, Miraca? So I think in the title it says, you're researching stories. So you're finding really exciting behaviors, and you have to think about it in a really visual way. So like for me, I don't have a science background, and what I've always been really strong at is my storytelling. I can find, one thing that I've always been really good at is finding a key bit of behavior and going, that feels really exciting, and then packing a story around it. And then, once you kind of get that, okay, once you've, developed your story a bit, you then, do a lot of research into kind of, how you actually achieve filming it and the approach. And that can take months and months and months of time to do. So there's a lot of it. So that's kind of like the research side of things. And you work with your assistant producers and your producers very closely, and you just find out like literally absolutely everything that you possibly can about that animal, that species, about that location, because it's one of those things that detail is really important. So knowing about the weather and how that might affect the animal that you're filming, can completely change things. So it's really about detail. Detail is really, really important. But also, and then you have to do like risk assessments and things like that. So you've got to be aware of like the health and safety side of things. With that, COVID has been fun for that, for sure.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, our production coordinators are incredible human beings. They have it really tough. So they do all the logistics side of things. So like all the flights, accommodations, all the hard work, all the negotiating, and then having COVID on top of everything is just, they're absolute superheroes. But then I also get to go out on location and I get to direct as well. So my producers are amazing. They kind of let you go, well, this is your story, run with it. We'll work it up together, but you tell me what the behavior is, you tell me what the story you think it is and how we should film it and shot list it, storyboard it, and let's go out and film it. So
that's fantastic. So in that you're now gaining that knowledge, that experience, while you're as a researcher, you're gaining producing and directing experience, which just leads you on to those things in the future, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they're no, definitely want to head up that way, because I used to be in production management. So in production management, like I was saying, you do all the logistical side of things. And so in all my kind of previous productions before, so this is actually like my first role as officially as a researcher on a production. Right. So before I was in development as well. So I was like doing lots of treatments and designing like programs essentially, and getting people to buy them, which was an amazing experience as well, like seeing how the business side works of the natural history unit, and getting that kind of, again, like sort of writing and script, like, well, I don't do so much scripting, but writing. Sure. You do a lot of and things like that. And then before that, I was in production management, but I was always doing like research, like I was always doing researcher roles and things like that. Because I was like, I want to be a producer one day. Right. So I was doing that for 4 years before I, moved over into researching. So it's, as I said, it takes time. I mean, some people, can go really fast and shoot up really fast. Sure. For me, it's been a process, but at the same time, it's made me really hone in a lot of skills, and a lot of skills that I have with production management then also lead to kind of like when you get to producer level, you budget and you do lots of budgeting and things like that. And I already have that background.
Sure, yeah. And you're also, there might be other faster ways to do it, but you're also researching on one of the biggest landmark series in the world, that natural history has ever seen. So it's not like you're you're working on a small production and you're taking your time with it. You're progressing, you're working at the top of your game. And so, from that point of view, it's not a lot of time at all, considering.
No, exactly. I forget sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know many people who would give a limb to be in your shoes. So, and just let's skip back a little bit, because we missed a bit there. Kind of, once you got your foot in the door with the BBC, what was the progression that actually got you to work on Planet Earth? So, I mean, you worked on Planet Earth 2, I believe. You're working currently on Planet Earth 3, which when is Planet Earth 3 due to come out?
I think at the moment 2023. It was meant to come out next year, but COVID,
the world changed.
Stopped a lot of things. Yeah, the world stopped.
Right.
So I think it's 2023.
Okay. So you had this transition at some point, and you managed to get to be a researcher from a production manager to a researcher on Planet Earth 2, Planet Earth 3. That's huge. So what was that progression? How did you make that jump? And that's something we'd all like to know, I think.
So I think it's two things. One thing was I always did more than what was asked of me, because I was constantly trying to prove myself. So whenever I, not only was I doing production management roles and responsibilities, and I never let them slide, they were always right up there. But I also kept saying, can I help? Can I do this? I'd like to do this. This is kind of where I'm also really interested in. And I think the turning point was on Earth's Greatest Spectacles, where I worked really closely with the producer on the New England episode. And I essentially was the researcher and the production coordinator for that episode. And I worked really closely with my producer, Paul Williams, and then at the time, and I actually was credited as a researcher on that. And that was amazing. That was like my first foreign filming shoot that I got to go out, and that was full of lots of fun stories. And so it was that kind of balance of, I already had my responsibilities. I didn't let them slide, but I took on more, and I just kept that attitude going and just kept, gaining as much experience as I can. And then for getting on Planet Earth 2, I directed a shoot for to Christmas Island. It was a second shoot. So they'd have gone out previously before, but they didn't get the behavior that they wanted with the crabs. And then we were hoping that I would go out for that shoot and try and get the behavior. But I think I was an El Nino year and washed all the baby crabs away. So we didn't get it, which was a shame. But that was because it was a producer that I'd worked with before on The Great British Year, which was my first production that I worked on. So it also has to do with people knowing you, which is really frustrating because I think that's kind of a common thing. It is partly who you know. Not like always. It's not like, it's just, it's people need to put a lot of trust in you, and it's building trust and it's building rapport. And that's really what it is. It's about, constantly proving that people can put their trust in you, and then you can deliver. And so that's kind of what happened. I was, kind of taking on more responsibilities. And then I think I got the job in development because I had I was finishing my contract, and I was sort of asking around, seeing what was going on. And I had 3 producers that I had previously worked for, all messaging the head of energy development saying, you should take Miraca, sort of thing. And that, went through the proper interview process and things like that. And it's all official, but it's also having people vouch for you as well. So it's really just all about building trust and things like that. So and so once I went through the proper interview process, I got the job, and I was there in development for about 2 years, and I got to work with a lot of the executive producers as well. And again, it was just kind of showing off my skill sets, proving myself to as many people as possible, and building trust, and just getting as much experience as I can, and just really honing in on my yeah, as I said, my storytelling skills. And it sounds funny to say this, but I'm a very visual person, and not everybody is in the natural history unit, because sometimes it's a scientific thing, and I see everything very visually. And it's also about how you put a team together, because everybody has certain skill sets that make a team. So yeah, I think
I think that's such a valid point, because I'm a visual person as well. That's how when I think of filming a story, I see it in my head, before I pick the camera up. So, and having filmed with numerous scientists, I think I'm not wrong in saying, and scientists agree with this, is a lot of the time, because they're so analytical, they have a hard job explaining what they do in layperson terms that other people can really understand it without getting too technical. And so much of the time, our job as filmmakers is to take that and put it in a format that people can understand very clearly, without getting into the weeds.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of partly where my skill set is, because I'll be reading like scientific papers and won't have any idea what most of it say. Right. I don't understand the graphs. I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. But it's about, like you said, it's about pulling out these kind of key bits that make sense and that make a story. So I feel like if it makes sense to me, that it should make sense to other people. Right. But I mean, again, it's like all my research documents are just like full of lots of beautiful pictures.
Well, that's great. I mean, but the great thing about this industry is I think we all work differently. And that's what I try and show in this podcast is, there's no set workflow necessarily. It doesn't matter whether you're an editor. There's not really a set, there are fundamentals, but we all have our own workflows. Camera people, we have our own workflows and styles of doing things. Producers, it doesn't matter where you are in the industry, you can have your way that works for you. And that's what makes it so interesting. I love
there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. It's about being authentic and about being yourself, and just working hard and being that person that people want to work with. And I think, again, I'll bring this up just because it always comes up, and I know this so much, that when you're working in small crews traveling the world, you want to be with people who you get on with. Obviously you want to like them, right? But you want to get on with them, but you want to know that they've got your back, and that you're all working for the best to get that production made. Obviously, sometimes things happen, like you say, weather, behavior doesn't happen. That's something else. We can't force that. But if we are all working to help each other, then those are the people you want on your team. And it doesn't matter whether you're traveling the world or you're in an office and you're working together on a production. You just want to know, as you say, you can put trust in people that on a production, we're all working so incredibly hard that if someone else can take the slack up when you can't, that's kind of what you want, isn't it? To be with a crew like that. Absolutely. You want everybody to, muck in, because, as I said, it's a team game, really. And you can't do it without people on the ground who are those, those scientists and those experts that you talk to. And they're amazing people, allowing us to kind of basically use all their hard work to tell, and we get all the glory. But it's these people that are on on the ground, like, day in and day out, studying these species. And we get to tell those stories. And as you said, it's having people make the experience, and people make the programs. And as you said, like having people who you can have a laugh with, but also know when you need to knuckle down, and you go for it. And it can be really challenging. I mean, there has been instances where sometimes people's emotions can get really up and down, or quite people can get quite emotional, like we're quite frustrated and things like that. And and that's understandable, because people care and people want to make the best program that they can. But as you said, I think more importantly, it's being aware of your emotions around other people, and like being part of the team, and just trying to. And at the end of the day, like, we kind of have this like sort of running joke. We all sort of say, it's just telly. It's just telly. Just telly. It's okay.
Telly. There you go. For our American listeners, that's TV. I say telly to people here and they go, what's that? I think probably on the East Coast they probably know, but here they don't know what I'm talking about when I say telly. I'm going to watch telly. What's that?
So.
Okay, so here you are. You're working on Planet Earth 3. I think probably what I get this question a lot with people that I speak with who are looking for ways of finding stories, and I think what we would like to know from you, Miraca, more than anything is, how do you go about as a researcher finding those stories? Where are you looking to find behavior that I mean, I know, we're not always talking about behavior that's never been seen before. Yes, that's the the arc of what you're trying to find, right? The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is something that's never been seen. But a lot of the time it's just elaborating on behavior we know's out there and trying to film it in a more in a better way that's not been seen before. But how do you go about first of all finding a story? Do you start with a species and then move to find behavior, or what's your workflow with that?
So when you start a program, you're kind of you're given a brief. So it's sometimes a bit easier when you have habitat based programs. So Planet Earth 3 is a habitat based program. So you start with that. You start kind of like looking in those kind of areas. And sometimes you have like so when I worked in development as well, you kind of help start sort of finding some stories to kind of put in the treatment, and a lot of time they never go into the final program. Right, because you're so fast like churning things out. But when you're in production, you've got a little bit of a baseline with kind of the style and the genre, and like as you said, there are lots of species that we've already filmed and things like that, so we can kind of quickly sort of say, well, we're not going to film that species because it's been done so many times. We need to look outside the box and things like that. And then once you start finding story, I will say how I found them in a minute. And then, but once you start finding stories, you then think about the emotion, what those stories are saying, what they're telling, and how it fits into the program. So you have an overarching narrative. So sometimes you can have like two stories, both just as amazing as each other, but maybe one fits better emotionally than the other. It's, whether that's like kind of like a fun story or a really dramatic or a really sad story. So there's lots of things to kind of like consider. But the way that I find stories is, just as lots of different resources. Sometimes I use Instagram. Instagram can be great. And Twitter, I'll like search for certain things, just news pieces. So we have the Daily Mail, for example, which is a bit of a trashy news, I think. I'm not sure what the right word is for it, but like they always have like really bizarre, weird, like stories. So I worked, another way is like looking at really old programs. So I worked on a series called Nature's Weirdest Events, which is a fabulous series, and it's always it has the most weirdest and the most bizarre kind of like stories, but they're not filmed in like a blue chip way, so you can kind of like look through some of the old footage and go, oh my goodness, that's an amazing story, and they haven't actually filmed the behavior properly, so then we can be like, oh, we'll go do that, that's amazing.
Right. And then you can use the archival stuff as well, or do you just refilm the whole thing? Yeah,
I mean, it depends on depends on what's been shot. I mean, generally we tend to film the whole thing new, but we can use a bit of archive. Sometimes we're only allowed to use like a certain percentage of archive and things like that. So there are a couple of little ways, just sort of reading. Sometimes I found reading old books and things like that, and kind of seeing if what new research has come out. Lots of online sites as well. I think there's like the New Scientist and things. It's just a lot of reading. We call them like rabbit holes, and like YouTube as well. Like I'll just look for videos on YouTube. I mean, you would, in the early days, you spend like hours and hours of just like reading and watching things. And then you'll have your little eureka moment. You're like, oh, that's a good one. Let's bank that one for later. And we'll.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because Patrick Dykstra, who we had on the podcast a few episodes back, he was filming whales and with a drone. And I believe that it was the BBC that a researcher found his footage on Vimeo. And that went into Blue Planet 2, I think. And now he travels and he's filming whales for productions. He's just had his own series, actually, Chasing Giants, I think, on Discovery. And that's all about him. But that's how it started. A researcher found his footage.
Yeah, I mean that's what we do. Like I said, like on Vimeo, And then so I mean, there is that aspect where we like reach out and spread the word, but also sometimes like contacts and camera people will get in contact with us and tell us stories. And so it's about building rapport with people. And then sometimes you work up a story and it doesn't, it hasn't worked in one program. So you keep that rapport going and you keep that connection there, because you never know where it might fit elsewhere and like whatever program comes about. So there's just lots of different ways. It's always a bit daunting. I always find it really daunting when I first sort of start the process. But then you naturally just kind of, you just start going through things, you start reading things, and one thing leads to another, which leads to another, that leads to another. So yeah, it's just it's quite fun actually.
I think it's interesting hearing you talk about it like that, because I think with any of us when we're researching, when I research a story that I want to film, it kind of feels a bit like you're not getting anywhere a lot of the time. Like you're just surfing the web, right? Or as you say, you're reading a book, and it feels like I don't really feel like I'm working. I should probably, I'm sure it should go faster than this, but actually that is the process. Until something fits together and works and you go down that rabbit hole and it all starts coming together, that is the process. And it's not a clean process, it's pretty messy, but that's how it works, right?
Yeah, and like also as well, like the amount of times where I've had like conversations with people and like a passing comment's made and you go, oh, actually that's really interesting, let's elaborate more on that, and then you find something really interesting out and you're like, oh great, this is actually what I'm after. So I think conversations with people is really important as well, to have as many conversations as you can, as well as much reading as possible. And yeah, like like I said, like surfing the web, like we have amazing resources now, with like social media and things like that. Like there is a lot of resources. So it's not always about like reading papers. They do help, and I do that as well, like when I'm researching, if I'm looking for so like sometimes we might think about, oh, we'd like to film this species, but we don't know what the story is. So I will try and find like an expert and talk to them, and things like that. So there's lots of different ways, and it's really whatever works for you. I mean, everybody has a different approach to it. So yeah.
so what I would love to delve into a little more, because you say storytelling is kind of your big thing, and storytelling is I mean, it's what it's all about, right? I've said this many times. You can have the most incredibly shot film, on using the latest technology, but if there's no story, it's unwatchable. And yet you can have a really good story with a bunch of old footage in it and maybe not the best cameras, but you can watch it because there's a story that keeps you hanging on to see where it goes. So with my mentoring group, one of the things that comes up all the time is story. It's one of the hardest things that people find, when they're working on a story, to really craft that story. Because I think in this genre, it's so different to so many other genres. I mean, if we just look at Hollywood films for a minute, if you look at Hollywood films, you can go back to the beginning of time with filmmaking, and pretty much they're telling the same stories over and over and over. They're just different actors, they're different settings, things like that. But, a love story is a love story. It's got different details in there, but it's a very similar story arc. But with natural history, there's many different ways to tell a story. I mean, Planet Earth is literally kind of lots of little stories. I don't know what they are, about 6 or 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes per species or story going on, to make an hour. So let's talk a little bit about that, and maybe some differences in how stories are told. So let's look at, first of all, Planet Earth. If you're taking one species or one story in that timeline, are you using a traditional story arc with that, like a 3-act story arc, or are you kind of breaking that mold completely?
I mean, I think we do use that three arc or 5 arc story, because it's a helpful basis, but it is led by the behavior, and then it's working around that behavior to make a story that makes sense, and what that emotion is saying. It's like, what do we want this story to say with this behavior? Is it saying, so we think about like lots of different themes, is it saying that this animal is being incredibly resourceful, or is this animal making the most or looking for a mate. So we all have these kind of like, so in the sense, like the same what Hollywood has, we also have the same sense where, that there are animals that do certain behaviors, like, is it finding food, is it finding a mate, is it finding what else is there?
That's pretty
finding
much
water,
it.
like this. Yeah. I was like, is there more to
Food and a
it?
mate.
So there's sort of like recurring themes that we have, but what's amazing is that all these species have incredible different ways of doing this and approaching it, and it's tapping into that species kind of way of doing that, and bringing out the personality of that creature. And I think that's one thing that I love. I know it's a bit controversial when you're sort of talking about like I can never say it anthropomorphizing, and which we don't do, but I think it's when you're watching an animal and you're spending all this time and you're seeing it, it's hard not to see that there is a personality there, and there is a character, and there is an emotion, and so that's something that's really important for us to bring out into these animals, is to capture them. And so what I'd sometimes do when I'm kind of building a story, especially if there's a lot of behavior, sometimes you have one species that has not a lot of behavior, but may look amazing, is in an incredible environment. So then you've got to think about, how do you pack out that story? So do you include the landscape within that, and make it not only about the animal but the landscape that it's in, and you set the scene up like that. Or if you have a species that's got a lot of behavior and you don't know which one to pick because there's so much to choose from, I tend to pick out all the key behaviors and write them in little blocks and then shuffle them around and see what makes sense.
That's interesting. So you're picking one out, but for like a Planet Earth, but just because of the length of the piece, and just keeping it simplified, so you're just following that one behavior.
Yeah, because it's incredible. What we do is incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
And to capture a whole life, even so, dynasties, they do that, where they follow one character for a year, and that's incredible, and they get amazing stuff. We don't have that luxury. Sure. On Planet Earth 3, we're telling the story of a habitat and the animals that are in that habitat. So that's also what we think about as well. You think about the overarching theme, so it feels like one film instead of like lots of little pieces. So we really try well, we are really trying hard to make it feel like one story of this habitat, and then within that, as I was saying as well, you have your kind of your emotional narrative. Some stories will complement each other, and they'll feel kind of similar ways, and then you'll have like a contrasting story on top of that, and we try and pepper that in within the story. We love a twist. Whenever we can find a twist, we love a different ending. So I think that's really kind of how we, a lot of the time, how we do things, or at least how I've done things, is I try and base it around a certain behavior and then see how to pack around it and
where
see.
You can take it. Well, that's great. I mean, that's really good advice, because I think so much of the time, the kind of questions I get, how do you find a story to tell? And then how do you tell it, and how do you build that out? And I think that's a great starting point. It's to start with something that's unique, like the behavior. Because otherwise it's just this daunting task of, well, am I telling the entire life story of this particular species? Or, what's unique about it? Or sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one thing to do that I always do is I write, and I especially did this a lot when I was first starting, is I wrote absolutely everything out and then presented that to, my producers. Best thing to do is have all that information, write it all out, write every bit of information, and in the order that it happens, like the time, the life cycle and the order it happens, have everything there, and then pick out, well, what's the most exciting part of this story? And then simplify it. Like that's the way to do it. And then,
because otherwise it's just overwhelming, right? It's just overwhelming. You get all this information, like a long treatment. It could just be like too much information.
Yeah, well, we always have separate documents. Like I have like my research document, which has got all of the information that we need to, all about that behavior, how we approach filming. But then I have my separate documents, which is, the story side and the, simpler versions and the shot lists and everything like that. Because again, that's something that's, exciting about working in natural history, is that you don't film everything. There's always something new to film. There's always a new story to tell, even if it's a species that we think we know well. There's always seeming something new to be told about them, because we're still learning so much about them. We're just, I think we're just skimming the surface. So yeah, I mean, that's always daunting when you're first starting a project. You're kind of like, right, what hasn't been filmed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You say most things have. And so what I think is so important is having people hear that, it doesn't have to be. Yeah, of course, it would be lovely to find a new species that has this incredible behavior, and you're the person that films it, and you become, get into the industry, because that's, that I think is what a lot of people think they need to do to be in this industry when they're starting out. And actually, I can't remember who I was talking to. Maybe it was Sophie Darlington on the last episode, but we were talking about a film I saw back in 2017 at Jackson Wild, which was about pigeons in Paris. And it was so inspiring because it was a beautifully shot film about pigeons living in Paris. And it's like, you don't have to, travel to the Serengeti to go and film wildebeest, which actually have been filmed an awful lot. But, you don't have to go and find that new species. I mean, you literally could film something if there is behavior happening. Everything has behavior. It doesn't matter whether it's a ladybug or, wildebeest. There's behavior happening within that life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just about having a different perspective on it. Thinking about, okay, you've got your story in the middle, and then just go around in a circle around it. That's how I kind of imagine it. And then you just think, well, what perspective can I tell of that species or that behavior? Like, is there a new way to tell that and to show that? And as you said, like, we've all seen pigeons out on the street, but we don't pay attention to them.
Right.
So what happens? What happens when we pay attention to them? Wow, this is a whole magical world of these pigeons. But pigeons are surprisingly characterful.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing as well. It's like, if you've got a charismatic animal, it's surprising what that can kind of sustain as well.
Sure.
They don't always have to do that much.
Right.
But it's really about a different perspective, and that's what we always try and bring. And whether that's a conservation element, and I mean, that's kind of really important across our series and across the natural history series. It's really important to us as individuals, but I think us as a series and us as a production. And so it's that we have more creative freedom with that as well now. So as I said, it's different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you've got your document, right? You've got your initial I want to delve more into this, because people love this stuff, and I love this stuff, and it's great to know how someone at the top of your game researching for Planet Earth is putting these stories together. So you've got your research document, which has everything. You've pulled out your behavior. You're going to submit to your producers, exec producers, what have you, who and then they pick something and say, yes, this is great. Let's work on this. Where do you go then? You're building out the story, but then do you then start visually building it with a shot list at that point? Or, what's your workflow from that point on? Now you've got the behavior and the species that you're looking to build the story around.
I mean, I usually have the story first. Well, at least like the building blocks of the stories, and then you kind of like have a play around with it first, because that's what sells it.
Sure.
That's because you've got to present it to to your execs and to your producers and things like that. So I mean, normally it's kind of like just a little bit of like a a top line, and so you sort of just like explain like it in bullet points, and then if that sounds interesting, we'll go, okay, let's dive into this more. And then that's when you start diving into all your research document, or your research process, or at least this is how I do it. I kind of do like it
must be working for you.
yeah, it must be.
Right.
Yeah, because especially in the beginning, you need to cast your net super wide, so you're kind of like pulling out snippets. So you're like, okay, that sounds that interesting, that behavior sounds interesting. I'm just gonna write a little top line about it, have a couple of pictures with it, and then say, what do we think about this? To a producer, and then they'll go, yeah, this sounds great. And then I'll go into finding, you know, an expert on that person if that I haven't already found that person.
Yeah.
You know, just read as much as I can, see if I can find any books, and then, you know, start asking questions. You know, we really, as I said, like we do really rely on people on the ground because they tend to have like the most knowledge, and they're amazing people because we ask so many questions.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's the thing that I've also learned is there's always a question to ask, even when you think that you've asked all the questions, there's always more things to find out, and there's always more questions to ask, whether that is about the behavior, whether it's about, you know, the filming aspect and like how we actually achieve filming. You know, sometimes it's little things about like, you know, how far do you have to walk from you know, A to B, or like, you know, proximity to the species and things like that, because that all then filters into what camera equipment you use and what you need to bring with you, and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
So that's where I then do a lot of research into that, and through that process, more things come out, lots of little details that you can put then into the story and keep padding it out, and then it's a constant process.
Yeah,
it keeps sort of evolving, and you know, you have lots of people kind of like input in there, and it keeps kind of like changing and evolving. And then even when you get to location, the amount of times that you think you know what you're going to film,
right,
and it doesn't work out.
You get something else and another story comes up.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important to know as much as you can about that species, because you know, sometimes you might not have, you know, an expert with you or something like that, and that knowledge needs to be from you. And then your problem solving, I mean, that's a huge part of what we do. I mean, I would probably say that's the biggest skill.
Yeah.
And again, that's probably one of my biggest skills, is I'm always thinking about, okay, that's not working, how can I fix it, how can I make this puzzle work, how can I put this jigsaw puzzle together?
Being resourceful.
Exactly. Problem solving is a huge thing. So yeah, that's kind of my process anyway.
Yeah, sure. So then once you've got your story together, you're looking to put everything together to go out in the field. Who has put the shot list together? So are you leaving that to the camera person in the field or you're giving them a shot list, or where are you at kind of with that at that point?
It's a collaboration process. I mean, I'll do the shot list because I'll have a vision in my mind about what the story is, or, you know, with my, you know, talking with my producer as well and things like that. And we'll do that together and make sure we feel like we're getting all the right building blocks. And so we do a lot of that work before going out. And then obviously we have a lot of conversations with our camera people ahead of time. And that's always incredibly valuable time, because they have lots of ideas. And as I say, it's a collaboration process, it's teamwork. And so then, you know, they'll think of something that we haven't thought of. And so we'll add that in. And then when you're out on the field, you start filming. So you think, okay, we'll be like, right, this is our shot list. We want to get this, this, and this, because this is what's going to tell the story for us. And so this is how we're going to be able to stitch it together in the edit. Because that's really the key, is knowing what shots are going to work for when you get into the edit. So that's a big thing. One thing that's really good about making your own short films, or doing lots of your own filming, even if you don't want to be a camera person, it's really some of the best producers, storytellers started as an editor, because they're constantly working with story, they're constantly working with visuals, and they know what shots will work with what shots and things like that. So
building sequences.
Building sequences. So we have that in our back of our mind, like, okay, what shots are going to be there. And then when we're in the field, we rely on that expertise of our camera people to nail those shots. And then obviously as well, like whatever they want to do, you know. Right. So it's a complete collaboration, because, you know, as I said, like, you know, camera people are doing as you know, you're doing this day in and day out, and we rely on a lot of expertise.
Sure, yeah. And that goes back to the storytelling. You know, what I think makes a great camera person is understanding how a story is edited and put together. Because without that, you're out in the field and you can just point a camera and film stuff. But unless you have an idea of, okay, I've got that image, now I need this to work with that and to build the storyline. Without having sequences, you really have nothing in terms of telling stories. Yes, there are a few films out there who have been, there was, Sophie Darlington was talking about a film she saw recently about the mountain sheep herding. I can't remember what it was called, but it was all shot from a drone. And I saw a little bit of it. It's hugely interesting. It's kind of a slow burn, but it's all wide shots from a drone. But I mean, incredible landscape. But typically, sequences to tell any kind of a story are essential, because otherwise it's just not that appealing to keep a viewer watching. That's fantastic, Miraca. I mean, it's great to hear someone in your position be able to explain the process, because you're doing it for planet Earth, and just seeing your breakdown of your process. And I think so many people are on the right track with the way they're doing it. It just doesn't feel like it necessarily a lot of the time when you're in the weeds doing it.
I was going to say, like, absolutely. Like, I think I remember when I first got told that I was working on planet Earth, I was like, I didn't actually say anything to people because I didn't believe it straight away.
Right.
I was like, is that happening? And then you absolutely feel like deer in headlights a lot of the time. Right. But I mean, I felt like that when I first started, but at the same time, you have I've been incredibly lucky with the people that I work with. They're incredibly supportive and nurturing, and they just want to see the best for you. And that's why I get the opportunities to be so heavily involved with I'm part of the team producing it.
Yeah,
that's how they make us feel, especially our producers. They're like, no, this is our film, it's not my film, this is our film, and we're all part of the team. And it's just I feel very incredibly lucky that I am doing Planet Earth, but also at the same time I know that I worked really, really hard, and it feels nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. So I'm gonna give you a few quick fire questions here.
Oh no.
Well, they're just standard stuff. But it's first of all, what would you say right now is your most exciting experience you've been on as a filmmaker?
Oh, most exciting experience. I recently just directed a shoot, actually, for another program, and that was pretty amazing. Just partly because of the proximity that we were to the species, and just having the privilege to watch them for 3 weeks every day from from sunrise to sunset, and I really felt like I got to know them. Right. And I missed them.
Yeah, I'm assuming you can't tell us what that species is.
No,
you can't. Okay.
Well, I'm not sure, so I'm going to be on the safe side.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's always the best way.
But that was an incredible experience, and it was also incredibly challenging as well, because it's a different it wasn't my program that I was working on. I kind of got flown in and flown out type thing, and that was an interesting experience being able to do that. But that was pretty special.
Awesome. Now, if you had to give some advice to people who are looking to, let's break these up, because first of all, advice getting to work for the BBC Natural History Unit. I mean, the BBC Natural History Unit is kind of the pinnacle of the natural history, filmmaking world. And so many people aspire to work for the BBC in Bristol. What would you say for someone looking to break in any capacity? What would you say is the most important thing for them to do?
Oh, wow.
It's a small question.
I feel like that's a heavy question. I would say just, first of all, don't give up. If you want to do this, you'll get there. And I think also it's talking to people, and having that right balance of not quite pestering, but not dropping off the radar, and thinking. And you'd be surprised as well, like, just because it's natural history doesn't mean you have to do things in natural history to get into natural history. Like, think about things that you're generally passionate about, and maybe there's ways that they, cross over into things. Like I for instance, I work with someone now, and I used to see him in the bar next to the BBC.
Right.
Like he was he was a staff there, and he was like chatting to everybody, and
Yeah.
now he's working with us.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there's lots of different things like that. But I think
Yeah.
it's but bring a story if
Yeah.
you've got something that you want to tell and say. I would come with a story,
Yeah.
because then you can show your kind of creativity and your understanding of natural history, as well, because that's kind of like what people like look out for, and just I think, I'm just trying to think if there's anything.
Well, no, I'll just bring out that you mentioned, meeting people in a bar and knowing people and that kind of thing. But we mustn't forget that, like, festivals, meeting these people,
Yeah,
networking at festivals is so important, because you're in a place where
absolutely.
all of these people mingle. And it doesn't have to be that you run up and you have an interview at the, breakfast bar, at Jackson Hole. It could be that you meet someone for 10 minutes, have a chat. Most of the time, it's so
Absolutely.
small, we remember each other.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I would always say, remember, if someone does say, "Oh, that would be great, let's go for a chat," always treat it like an interview, because I learned that
Right.
the hard way.
Right.
I was like, I was applying for a job, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, let's meet, and we'll go for a chat." And I was like, "Oh, that'd be great. We'll go for a little coffee." Oh no, it was an interview.
Right.
So that would be my little
You were
advice
too
as well.
casual.
Yeah, I think that's the thing as well. But like you said, it's having conversations
Yeah.
with people, and um, so if you don't know anybody, say if you're contacting like a production, you know, uh, there's no harm in saying, can I come by, or can we meet, and or can we Zoom? I guess in a COVID
In the new
world,
world, yeah.
in
Yeah.
the new world.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get, and seeing what other opportunities there are. Like, my way in the door was this, they had this this outreach scheme, which I applied for, and got to go on, and one thing kind of like led on to that. But like before that scheme, I was just involved with the local production company, and did like a little course with them. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have known about the face-to-face
Sure. Yeah.
outreach scheme. So it's always that process of like, one thing leads to another. And actually, talking about festivals and films, like before I worked on the with the local production company. Well, I didn't work with them. I was just making a film, like a short film, getting some experience. But I'd went to a film festival. It was in Bath, where I was living at the time, and they had this name of this production company. And I contacted them, and they were like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, we've got this going on." And so then, one thing, that moment of me going, "Oh, that's a name," and one thing just led onto another, onto another. And yeah, as I said, you kind of like meeting people and talking, and it's the same approach with research, really.
Sure. Yeah.
Once you
Yeah.
start going down a certain road,
Yeah.
you kind of keep one thing leads to another.
And
You eventually get
perseverance
there.
again.
Hmm.
Actually, one of the members of my mentoring group got a position as a junior researcher with the BBC, and she got that through just persevering and just being there
Hmm.
and knowing that that's what she wanted to do. And actually, it brings up another question that I don't know, if there's a direct answer for this, but a lot of people obviously think that they have to be in Bristol. It's like the Bristol is the hub of natural history, right? And so, okay, now I've got to work out, how do I move from the other side of the world to be in Bristol? A bit like, if you want to be an actor, you have to move to Hollywood and be a car valet or a waiter for, 10 years before you get a chance. People, I think, have that kind of mentality that they have to be there. Is that the case? I mean, it feels like the world is so much more open now.
Yeah, I mean, the world is so much more open. I think it depends on what role you are wanting to do. I think if you're a camera person, especially in a COVID world now, we tend to work with local operators. I think the idea of sending everybody out all across the world all the time, like we used to, just, I mean, our production I think carbon offset, so like we'll be completely carbon
Yeah.
neutral production, but we still have that very much in our mind. So we want to work with new local talent, especially with like camera people and things like that. So if you are halfway across the world, and not in Bristol, that's actually great.
You're right.
But I think working on production, it does help to be in in Bristol. So if you want to, if you want to be a producer, I mean, there are the other thing is, I mean, there's much more natural history production companies than ever before, ever than I know of. Like when I first started, I mean, it literally was just the BBC. And now I know people who are working on natural history programs that are, from production companies in LA, for example, because now that like Netflix and Apple and
well, and the BBC, right?
And the BBC,
we're all opening up an LA
yeah,
office, right? I think they've
exactly.
Yeah.
So it is becoming much more of a global perspective, for sure. And as I said, like sometimes, like we were talking about different time zones and things like that. I mean, if you've got somebody who's in country and can kind of like work up a story for you, that we can do those kinds of things, and I think we have done those kinds of things. But one thing that COVID has massively highlighted, I think for me personally, is it's so creative being around your team and being in the office and having these like organic conversations and just being able to really kind of like enjoy each other's energy and like and things like that. And that's what is for me is really important, and one an aspect of the job that I love. So if you don't mind working from home all the time, then I'm sure it'll be fine.
No, I think that's so important, because I think so many of us filmmakers who and camera people who are on our own a lot of the time, that's the biggest thing that we lack, is that camaraderie and that support when we all have ups and downs. I mean, some days you're so motivated and you get so much done, it's like, wow, this is incredible, and then days will go by where you just are in a slump. And it's a bit like writer's block, I guess, where you can't write. And yet you go to the film festivals, and it's, a lot of people who have been hidden away in their little offices on their own. They come out of their shells for that week or so, and that's all right, go back for a year and be on my own. And it can be hard. So, I think it's nice to know that, now, I mean, say in this new world where we can Zoom, and I think production companies are far more open now. Speaking with Janet Han-Vissering of the SVP of National Geographic, I mean, she gave email addresses away for people to contact them with stories and what have you. And I think, a long time ago, 10 years ago, you never would have had anyone giving out email address saying, contact us with what you have,
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think there was an attitude towards a certain, like I remember when I first started at the BBC, or in telly, not just BBC, but like applying for jobs and things like that. I was always asked, "Oh, do you have a university degree?" And I'd be like, "No, no, I don't." Yeah. Now no one asks me. I don't get asked that anymore. They just assume.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's also an attitude change with that as well. I think people, what's been realized is that diversity is really important. And that's all kinds of backgrounds, like as I said, like my parents never went to university, I never went to university, so I have a different background in that sense. And I think I think there's just a new kind of like wave of inclusivity, and just seeing that because it's like I always see it as like biodiversity. When we're looking at a habitat, biodiversity is like what makes it strong, and I think that's what we need in as filmmakers is that with our people and the people that we work with and all of that. So I think
well, it's awesome. I mean, it's awesome. I haven't got a degree either, and a lot of people assume I have. They talk to me and think, "Oh, where did you go to university?" I didn't go to university. But life experience and experience in the industry is what creates where I'm at, and the same for you, obviously. And I think for so many people, if you've got a camera and you're out there filming, you're gaining experience every second you're filming. And and I think one of the things that really makes this industry so unique is that observation, just observing wildlife, is huge. I mean, there's not many jobs that you could say, hey, if you're just going to sit in the wild and watch, that'll be the best experience you can get.
I remember when I first got my kittens, I literally just did that because I've never had cats before and I didn't understand their body language. So I just sat there and watched them for ages. And I was just like, I think this means what? And I'd be like watching YouTube videos of like,
right.
I'm like, so like, that's what I mean, but like people can do that, you know, and that stuff actually, like you can relate to other species in the wild and things like that. Like just, like you said, observe, watch what's right here in front of you. And it's all like really important, because if you're watching a species, you can think about like, oh, well, that look tells me something, you know, and I can think about how I'd frame that and how I'd, you know, shoot that. And like there's a lot of things, you know, all around us. And I think it's just kind of like seeing that perspective and running with it.
Well said. Absolutely. Well, Miraca, thank you so much for taking the time out to be on the podcast today. Really appreciate it. And just, you know, learning more about storytelling and for a program like Planet Earth is just so valuable. Do you have anywhere where people can follow you and see kind of what you're doing, that kind of stuff, social media or websites?
I'm not very good at that sort of stuff. Okay. I'm not allowed to post. I'm not allowed to post half the things I'm doing.
Right, of course. And that's actually really good to know. It's important for people to know that, because so many people do. They have websites and they're selling their, you know, they have websites because they might be a camera person and they're, you know, that's how they sell themselves or their portfolio.
Yeah.
But much of the time, I know people like yourself, you can't talk about what you're doing and you can't post pictures because it's top secret.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit secret. I think that's, I mean, as you said, I think that's definitely more sort of skewed, I think, like I said, to like camera people and things like that. Because, you know, for me as well, like working, I mean, unless you want to see things about, you know, my cats and things, you know,
there you go.
Then sure.
Right.
But I mean, a lot of it's just like my personal kind of,
sure.
I don't have like a what do you call a public profile.
Yeah. Okay.
But I am thinking that I probably should do that.
Well,
but I don't do.
Sure.
I've do anything for years.
When you do, then we can always add it, but we won't put anything on there. It's more about, you know, if people see what experiences you're having out there in the world. But as you say, I know, you know, much of the time with the BBC, you can't talk about, with many networks, you can't talk about what's going on until it's done and it's out. So a bit like
I mean, I do sometimes like post like, you know, little pictures of like the landscapes and things like that, but sure. I can't really post anything about kind of, you know, what I'm filming and stuff like that. And it's slightly a different world at the moment, partly because there's so many different, you know, opportunities and lots of different people trying to make films, which is amazing. But it has kind of made things a little bit more just a little bit more kind of like, I can't say that, which is a shame because I love to share.
For sure. It's funny to think that you're going to be like 4 years older, you know, when this stuff comes out and you can talk about it. And you're like, I said that 4 years ago.
Well, we can do that. Yeah, when it airs, we can have another catch up, and then
that'd be perfect. That'd be fantastic.
Share all the pictures and tell all the stories.
A couple of years to go. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Miraca. It's been fantastic talking with you.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's always lovely chatting with you as well. So thank you so much. And hopefully I've been of help. But yeah, I mean, you know, if someone did want to reach out to me, probably the best way would be like, on Instagram, because I think you can still send a message even if it's like
sure,
a thing. So, you know, I think I'm just Miraca Jane Walker. So, you know, that's fine.
Perfect.
But, yeah.
Well, I'll put a link on as well. It's on the webpage, on your episode page at jakewillers.com or masterwildlifefilmmaking.com. There'll be your episode on there, and we'll put that link on there for people. Awesome. Thank you so much, Miraca.
No worries. Cheers.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Master Wildlife Filmmaking Podcast, then please leave a rating and a comment. And remember to subscribe to keep up to date with the series' future episodes. You can find out more information about wildlife filming at jakewillers.com. And if you're interested in starting a career in the wildlife filmmaking industry or being mentored to further your career, then please visit jakewillers.com/mentorship. Thanks for listening.